very, very best.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Palazzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Weller, for being here today. I'd like to discuss natural resource conservation efforts being conducted in the Gulf Coast region. There's a ton of environmental and biological diversity along the coastline of the Gulf of Mexico. And so I'd like to bring up a couple of questions regarding the steps being taken by NRCS to ensure the preservation of these natural resources in the region. I mean, we have 1.3 billion pounds of seafood comes out of the Gulf of Mexico each year. How are y'all working with local fishermen and others to preserve our fish and shellfish stock while also meeting the public's demand for Gulf seafood?
So in part, sir, we recognize the value of private land stewardship in terms of maintaining the health and the bounty of the Gulf Coast ecosystem, and is one of the reasons why in the wake of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, USDA was a strong advocate for participating in the Trustee Council and the Restore Council efforts in the Gulf Coast region. And really our mantra has been, if you look at the land ownership in the 5 states of the Gulf Coast region, from Texas all the way to Florida, almost 90% of the land in those 5 states are privately owned. And those are predominantly rural lands, they're farmed, they're forested, and they're ranched. And so if you care about both the water quality and the quality of life, the economic vibrancy of those communities, you got to start first and foremost with those farmers and ranchers. So, for example, we then launched a targeted effort, which we call the Gulf of Mexico Initiative. You may have heard about, because we like acronyms, we call it GOMI, G-O-M-I, where we identified 1 or 2 river systems, small river systems that went upland into the upper parts of the state, but really impacted Gulf Coast resources. And there we're working voluntarily with farmers and ranchers to put in place conservation practices that improve their bottom line, but also reduce loss of sediment and inputs off their farm fields, ultimately then reducing water quality concerns down in the Gulf Coast region, we think then helping to heal the estuaries that those shrimp fishermen depend upon for their production.
Yeah, and I heard some talking about the Mississippi Basin River watershed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all the water from all the states along the Mississippi, they come eventually and they enter into the Gulf of Mexico, dumping nutrients and other human activities are going in there, and it's creating, as you also know, a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And in 2015, I think it was probably one of the largest that we've seen in a long time, almost 5,000 square miles. The Hypoxia Task Force only covers 1,900 square miles, the size of Connecticut and Rhode Island, just to put it in perspective. So it's not just, you know, our state, it's the entire watershed. What initiatives do you have? And I understand, you know, conservation, especially in Mississippi, in southern states, I mean, we take conservation very seriously. We want clean water, we want clean air, we want to continue our sporting heritage for generations to come, and fishing and so forth. Is there an emphasis on trying to address how we can shrink the dead zone or prevent it from becoming larger?
Yes, so we have had, similar to the Gulf of Mexico Initiative, we've also had this, what we call landscape approach to conservation in the Mississippi, called the Mississippi River Basin Initiative, MRBI, where we know we don't have the resources to treat every acre. You can't provide palliative care to every farm field. But what we're trying to do is then target where there's the greatest risk of loss of sediment or nutrients. And so we generally know through science, and state and local folks know where those areas are, those kind of critical areas, those priority zones. We're then targeting assistance to producers, voluntary assistance again. But it's hard when you talk to producers, I'm sure you realize, whether they're in Wisconsin or Minnesota or Iowa, they don't have that, I think, emotional, personal connection with the Gulf of Mexico, but they do have that personal connection to their local creek, their local watershed, their local community. And so, for example, that's why we're partnering with the state of Iowa and their Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy, working side by side with the Iowa Department of Agriculture and other Iowa Agricultural Water Alliance, where they're taking a proactive, voluntary approach, working with farmers in Iowa to address their local concerns that may be impacting the city of Cedar Rapids or Des Moines. Ultimately, that will benefit folks along the Gulf Coast, but you're making it tangible and real for folks in Kentucky, in Ohio, in Indiana, how they can be part of the solution, but also see improvements in their communities, but ultimately will roll up to a cleaner water flowing into the Gulf.
Well, we just need to get them to come down there and do some fishing, and then I believe they will have that emotional connection to the Gulf Coast. Thank you, Mr. Young.
Is that an invite?
It's an invite for everybody on the committee.